When the publisher of a magazine that you've been reading most of your adult life calls and says he's going to be in town and would like to see your operation, you say yes. And then you ask him to sit down and do a podcast with you. At least that's what I did. I had the privilege of sitting down and BSing with Jim Keefe of Recycling Today magazine a few weeks ago and thoroughly enjoyed our conversation of everything scrap related. Take a listen. All right, everybody. I got a phone call probably about 2 months ago, and Jim from Recycling Today, Jim Keefe, called and said he was coming into town for a demolition conference, a demolition
NDA board meeting.
NDA board meeting. So we'll get into that here in a minute. But you called and we shot the shit about scrap recycling, your long history, and kind of an ancillary part of our business, and being around scrap yards, being around recycling facilities, ins and outs. You've probably toured and visited more scrap recycling facilities than most people can shake a stick at. So when you called me and told me you were going to come into town and you were going to carve out a little bit of time for me, and I said, hell yeah, as long as I can con you into doing a podcast. So, so anyways, Jim Keefe, Recycling Today, thanks for coming out. And,
Great to be here.
I so much appreciate just taking the time and shooting the shit and just kind of getting some insight from
it's been a good
your
day.
side of the business. Yeah. Did a couple yard tours.
Yeah, very interesting.
Just kind of walked you through, our little corner of the world over here in Idaho. And what'd you say? You were telling me earlier, you said it kind of surprised you how hot it got here.
Yeah, you forget, you think you're going to Idaho, it's going to be, cooler. You're pretty far north. But you're in the high desert, and it was like 100 degrees yesterday.
Yeah.
And the sun was really hot.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
I was listening to the news on my way in this morning, and I don't know if they officially said it, but they said that they thought we either set a record or we pushed pretty close to some high heat, yesterday. That yesterday was up there in the whole grand spectrum. People were starting to get nervous about, is it going to get this hot? Like, is this going to be a hot summer?
Yeah, sure.
And so,
I can see that.
I guess being from the recycling industry, you start hearing stuff like that and all the him-hawing about, green technology and global warming and, depleting the ozone and all that stuff. I don't know, it's kind of some of that stuff hits home for me just because I start thinking about how much of this stuff's true, how much of it isn't, how much of the role does the recycling industry play in all that's going on, or is it just kind of that's the way it goes every 100 years, 1,000 years, I don't know. I don't know. I don't have the answer, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yes, I'm not a scientist, any more than you are. I'm reminded of the old saying that we don't inherit the earth from our parents, we borrow it from our children.
Yeah.
Right? So, regardless of exactly where all that is, I think if you think about that, it's a no-brainer that, there are ramifications of the decisions mankind makes to the environment. And you also think about the idea that it's better to conserve, right, in anything in your life, right? If you should conserve your resources, you should conserve what you have. And recycling is, recycling dates back to biblical times. And I have a mug in my office that a scrap dealer in Tennessee sent to me, and they have this saying, from fur trade to scrap to steel, and I got this maybe 10 years ago, and they were a 125-year-old company.
That's great.
And why? Because even in those early days in the United States of settlers working way across the country, right? If they threw a horseshoe or broke a tool or whatever, they didn't throw it away. They saved it. And when they went to the trading post, they turned it in for credit.
Yeah.
Right? Why? Because it has value, right? So, just the idea that, conserving and saving value, but you also look at things like, we're drinking these, LaCroix out of aluminum cans. And, aluminum, more or less, there's an 80% savings in the energy consumption from recycling aluminum versus utilizing virgin aluminum. Well, we all know what energy costs and the strain that delivering energy puts on our society, right?
Yeah.
Conserving that seems very basic to me. So I think the recycling industry is pivotal in that.
I think that the recycling industry is only going to get bigger, and its role is only going to get larger in our society as A, the population grows, but B, I mean, in America, we're very heavy consumers. We're a very consumer driven economy.
Consumption society. Yeah.
So our ability to, manage that material flow is what's going to be, what's going to really make us or break us, from an environmental side. Our ability to manage the excess aluminum cans, the pot, we're talking about plastic water bottles, and you brought up a good point. It's the recycling of the water bottle. The issue isn't the amount of plastic being generated. It's actually the system of getting it back to its form that it can be recycled and reproduced into another water bottle.
Yeah, I mean
And then-
that's a big issue.
That's a
that
whole big hairy topic, but I mean, but just to kind of the Cliff Notes version is would I rather drink water out of an aluminum can? Absolutely, because that's the industry I'm in, right?
Right,
Yeah, I
right.
mean, but is the plastic bottle going away anytime soon? I don't see it going away, and just because of the economies of it,
Not
right?
at all.
The
Yeah.
the price of bottling water in an aluminum can versus bottling it in plastic is significantly different. So, before we start trying to figure out how to get rid of the plastic bottle, I mean, we might want to start looking at how do we recycle it better.
Yeah, make it more efficient to
Yeah.
recycle it, to recover it, to get it into the system.
And that way you can make a good decision at that point. Now, okay, do we start trying to feather in these other, products into
I
it?
think one of the big differences, that, so people find out that I'm a publisher in the recycling industry, right? Like
Yeah.
you're at a dinner party, you're at a, soccer game, for your kid, whatever, right? And they ask questions, and I ask people, what do you think the thing that you use like every day in your life probably that's most recycled? And
Yeah.
you get answers like, oh, my plastic bottle or a newspaper or different things, right?
Yeah.
But the answer really is your car.
Oh, yeah.
Why? Because there's so much value in an end of life car, right? And so it gets recycled automatically. The trouble with things like plastic bottles is that incrementally the value of that bottle isn't very great. And so there's less of an incentive to go out and capture every one of them. A car is big, has lots of ways to, extract that value, at the end of that life.
Yeah.
The same as we were just walking through your plant and, turnings that come out of a machine shop or, even the aluminum cans that were, you had a bunker full of them ready to meet the baler. That stuff has value. A lot of the things that can be easily recycled and are great to recycle individually don't have as much value. So the system has to be built in a way that can be collected and funded. And I think what we're seeing in a movement towards communities having a bit of a recycling surcharge so that the companies who are charged with going around and picking that stuff up at people's house,
Yeah.
when you calculate the cost of collection versus the cost of the material, it's a negative formula. A small fee helps to offset that, right? So
Yeah.
now you can begin to have a circular economy and get that stuff back into the recycling stream, the reuse stream. I believe that has to happen.
So maybe going into that question, what's your opinion? Because I just was kind of discussing this with Jennifer Betts from Argus Media the other day. We were talking about, my wife and I went to Oregon for one of our friends, their daughter graduated high school. So we went there and we stopped by the store and we bought a case of beer. And I was like, and my wife's like, geez, did you see how much extra they charge us for that beer? Because Oregon's a redemption state,
Yeah,
and
deposit.
we're not in Idaho, right? Deposit state. And I think it was like, 24 times 5, And I was like, and she's like, gosh, that's like a lot. I mean, she goes, if you were to buy that regularly here, it kind of adds up eventually. And I was like, yeah. And I said, because Oregon's a deposit state,
Yeah.
and because she had never really thought about that. But in our business, we think about it a lot.
Sure.
And I was having that conversation with Jennifer. I was like, part of me, as much as I don't want the government involved in any more of what we do, like I'm kind of an anti, like hands off type of individual when it comes to government and,
Yep.
and their overreach. But there is some part of me that says if you made the deposit 50 cents a can, like something crazy, people would start to figure out how to get the shit out of the trash, right? Like eventually, at some point, there's a tipping point, and I don't know what that tipping point is, but it almost has to be created.
Yeah, I mean,
And I don't. You've dealt with enough.
right.
Some states
There are pros and cons to those. When you get into this whole discussion about bottle bills and deposits and so forth, one of the issues that we have to be respectful of is the fact that if you pull through deposit bills all of the high value recyclables out, then and create their own parallel system to the post consumer recycling chain, then you've just saddled the companies who we ask to invest millions of dollars in infrastructure. We just robbed them of all the high value material, or we robbed that system of the high value material, which helps to mitigate those necessary infrastructure costs, right? And that's a problem. So you really have to think through that and how's that going to work. The other thing is, if you look at California, they have a deposit state as well, and that system has been plagued with problems, for a long time. It doesn't mean you should jettison it, but how you manage it is important. And I think today we're seeing a lot more of the consumer brands becoming aware of and pressured to think about the end of life of their packaging, right?
Yeah.
So what's going to happen to it after? And I think that there's a balance that the industry is going to have to work through in terms of setting up a whole bunch of different parallel systems. Seems terribly illogical and wildly inefficient, right? But at the same time, there should be pressure on consumer packaged goods companies to think about how they package things, right?
100%.
If you look at computer companies, these microphones, if they come in a box, but it's a box that has molded pulp packaging instead of styrofoam, that's probably a lot better because molded pulp is a lot easier to recycle. Styrofoam can be recycled, but as with anything, touring your operations, right? We walked through your chopping plant earlier today, and it's very efficient. Why? Because you aggregate enough volume from your other yards into that facility. Getting enough volume of styrofoam into one place is really hard, right?
Yeah.
And
it's made to be light,
exactly,
and airy, and take up a lot of space with very little weight. It's just,
right.
It's kind of the
and
opposite.
It has to be kept segregated in its own material, whereas molded pulp can be blended with other stuff. It can be part of an OCC pack. It can you can be part of a mixed paper pack. You can do different things with it at the recycling plant level, and so it just there are decisions like that have to be made. Things that go into how a package is designed. When you add layers to stuff, and all of a sudden you've taken something like a PET bottle that's very recyclable, but you put a wrap on it that has a foil with it. Yeah. Now you just really complicated the science. And how do you make all of that work? There has to be more awareness. We're both members of a group of ISRI, right? And ISRI does their Design for Recycling Award, right? That's a great program because it acknowledges firms that think about end of life for their product. And that's complicated the recycling industry a lot. Companies who don't think about that, and then all of a sudden the recycling industry is now somehow responsible for properly managing something that's dangerous at the end of its life or hard to recycle or difficult to recycle. And then people get upset because there might have to be a fee associated with that. Yeah. Well, wait a minute. The recycling industry didn't create that issue, right? We're just trying to deal with it at the end of the life.
Yeah, you're just trying to figure out a way to repurpose it, reuse it, and get it back to its original form so it can be used again. I mean, that's where I think scrap companies have taken, a lot of heat. Is that, I mean, we're not really viewed as a manufacturing company, right? Because manufacturing kind of has its place in the world, and on the scrap recycling end, it's been viewed for a lot of years as kind of a dumpy, nasty place that nobody really wants in their backyard. And we were just having this conversation a little bit ago: is how do you get people motivated to understand, or at least maybe not even motivated, just get them to understand that the role that the recycling industry plays in their community, in their state, in their country, and get people on board to wanting those facilities in their town, in their city. And you bring up a really good point, and you said one thing that the scrap recycling companies need to work on being better at is showing the value that we're bringing to areas, right? And we're just, I mean, we are the best marketers all the time, right? Like we're in the recycling business, not in necessarily the marketing business, but I think we're starting to realize, hey, we have to be able to, communicate, all the good that we're also doing for these areas.
I think this is a major issue for the industry. We're almost, you could argue, maybe we're at an apex moment where we really need to get better about this. I would argue that not only, particularly in the scrap business, not only are we a manufacturing business, but we're a highly sophisticated manufacturing business, because the job is to manufacture a specification raw material, right? When you produce a product, whether it's going to a steel mill, an aluminum smelter, copper refiner, whatever it might be, you've got a package specification that you're accountable to as a supplier. And yet, you need to build that package, you need to create that package from a whole bunch of material that's not specification. So you have to clean it up, you have to get the stuff out, the outthrows, the contaminants, separate all of that out, get down to the clean package, and then deliver it. So that in many ways is a far more sophisticated kind of operation. People don't think about it that way, but if I'm making many, many things, I get my inbound docks have a spec material that then I'm making something else from.
Mm-hmm.
The inbound dock at a scrapyard doesn't get the beauty of a specification material.
Yeah.
It gets all the outthrows, all the ends, all the waste, all the done. This is over. We don't need it anymore. That hits your dock. Make something from it, right?
Yeah.
When you consider the amount of economic value that scrapyards deliver in their communities, it's massive. It's not just the jobs that they create and the taxes that they pay. How about the environmental cleanup that they do? We were talking a few minutes ago about, you go to a beautiful place like Hawaii, and you see abandoned cars on the side of the road. Mm-hmm. Why don't you see that in other places? Because there are scrap companies who help to create a mechanism through which those cars are reclaimed, right? Yeah. And they're recycled. And in that island environment, it's harder to do that, right? So that we've seen that in a lot of communities over the years. And scrap companies also, listen, they're buying material from not only commercial and industrial generators, whether it's a machine shop or an automobile manufacturer or local plumber or electrician, but they're also buying from peddlers. Yeah. Peddlers. Sometimes, truth is, sometimes some underprivileged parts of society who rely on that income as a staple for them to be able to maintain any kind of life. And the scrap industry gets zero credit for that. And they should get credit for that.
Yeah.
One of the mentalities that I have fought against, and you and I chatted about this on the phone a little bit, is there's an old, there's an old mentality in the scrap industry. We want to fly under the radar, right? The industry's got to get away from that. They got to get away from it. Companies have to engage their communities, and they have to share with them really what they're doing. Get folks, get your local councilmen, get your congressmen, get your, whatever they are, local politicians, local leaders, civic
Advocates,
leaders,
chambers of commerce,
chambers
people that are like
get 'em-
involved. Yeah.
Open up your yard, bring them in, show them what you do, share with them what comes in, but then also vitally important, what goes out
Yeah.
and how it happens. The industry fought this massive battle, years ago. We talked this morning about, pull apart yards and, auto dismantling. It's kind of related to scrap. It's not the same, but all of a sudden mercury switches. Well, the automotive dealers put it in so that when you pop your trunk, the light comes on, right? Super convenient, really great, right? Now the scrap guy, oh, you're an emitter of mercury, right? We all know mercury is dangerous, right? Why is that the scrap guy's liability, right? They're actually the ones working to clean it up, to manage it at the end of its life, right? Communities need to understand that we as an industry need to do a better job of sharing the value of what we do, right? I mean, if you look at aluminum recycling, said earlier, 80% energy savings, right? Mm-hmm. How many more power plants would we need in this country if we didn't recycle all the aluminum that we could?
I just put an article on LinkedIn on yesterday that talked about new steel manufacturing for windmills. I'm like, you guys want to build all these windmills and solar panels by 2050 to decarbon the world. I'm like, do you understand? Like, do you physically understand like how much steel that's going to take? They said you could recycle every pound of scrap steel available. I mean, nothing hits the landfill. And you still need a crazy amount of iron ore to get that done, right? And that's right. If every single pound of manufactured steel that was going to get recycled actually gets recycled and doesn't touch the landfill. It's an amazing amount of material that's going to have to be, that's going to have to be found, processed, sorted, melted into new steel, just to scratch the surface.
Exactly. And so many metals are, I say so many, all of them essentially are infinitely recyclable.
Yeah.
Right? Plastic's not that way. You can recycle plastic, and particularly if it's clean and so forth, but it's not infinitely recyclable, right? Because it continues to lose performance characteristics as it's recycled. Even paper has that element to it where it reduces some performance characteristics. Metals aren't that way. When you recycle steel and make new steel, you have steel.
Yeah.
Right?
You basically are taking the contaminants back out of it, and you're creating that slag or whatever else, and you're keeping the original form.
Right.
And then remake it. And so back to, like, what does it provide the community? Well, it keeps it clean. It, the jobs, the taxes, blah, blah, blah. But also, like, when you walk outside and you can breathe and you have clean air and, all the stuff that goes along with it, that's just kind of,
It's tremendous.
It's a
Keeps
huge
material out of a landfill.
Yep. So I want to switch topics on you a little bit. Give me a little bit of a background, just because on Recycling Today, yourself, and kind of how you got to. You and I discussed earlier. Just give me a little bit of background on you and what you do and how you ended up at Recycling Today, and then at the end, or not the end, but then after that, I kind of wanted you to give me like what Recycling Today's role is in the scrap industry.
So, Recycling Today goes back to 1963. It was actually founded as Secondary Raw Materials Magazine. And in 1968, the sort of beginning of the environmental movements in this country, the name was changed to Recycling Today. In the mid-'80s, our company, GIE Media, acquired Recycling Today, and a newsletter called Fiber Market News and Paper Stock Directory. And then we began to build the business from there as a a professional media company. And we think that our role in the industry is to help to facilitate discussion. It's to help share and disseminate business intelligence, market information across the industry. And as a media company, today we're active in, more or less 20 different industries, everything from aerospace manufacturing and pest control to golf course management, scrap metal, and the waste industry. And in all of our markets, we really believe that there is a role to be played to facilitate discussion and to help serve the industry by sharing information, sharing business intelligence, and also connecting people across the industry. We believe that's part of the role of media in all the markets that we serve. And so we not only publish in Recycling Today, but we publish construction and demolition recycling, which serves the demolition industry and the mixed C&D recycling space. We talked about this earlier. We got into that because the relation to the scrap business, because we cover paper recycling. Paper recycling led to post-consumer recycling as the industry's evolved, and that it now encompasses plastics recycling. Then, of course, end-of-life electronics. We talked about the fact that my son's now working in that business, and that's become a big and important part of the industry. And you talk about the benefits to society. The reality is that the smartphones and the computers and all this tech that everybody relies on also has a lot of dangerous constituencies, materials within them. If they weren't recycled, that stuff could be very harmful to the environment. Yeah. Recycling is really, really important for those materials. And then we also publish Waste Today, and more for the garbage business and post-consumer recycling market. I joined the business in 1991 and worked my way up through the business to eventually become publisher. And this is an industry that kind of gets into your blood. I've been fortunate to have a lot of fun doing it.
That's what I was going to say. When you and I originally talked on the phone, when you said you were coming into town for your board meeting, I'd never talked to you on the phone before that.
No.
I didn't know you from Adam. But one thing I'm passionate about is the scrap industry, right? And I could just tell by talking to you that you were passionate about the industry. So I'm like, oh, this is a guy I could spend some time with shooting the shit, right? Like,
it's fascinating business.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm willing to do it. Like, this is interesting to me. Because to hear somebody else's perspective, it's not necessarily a scrapyard operator, owner, equipment manufacturer, or whatever. Like, it's just a different take on our industry. But I could tell that you had a passion for it. And was it what got it kicked off in your eyes? Like when you started in '91, like what kind of, did it just grow on you, or was there just something you saw like, hey, there's a lot of potential there? Like what got you to that point?
I think it grew on me. You get into the business, you start meeting, like anything in life, you start meeting the people, and you realize that it's not just the scrap industry, but recycling as a whole, I would argue, it's very fraternal. I mean, you get to meet a lot of people. You create relationships, friendships. You learn how deep the business is. It's a fascinating global industry, and it's also rapidly evolving and continuously changing. I mean, if you look today at the equipment that's used, it's amazing how much it's advanced. Mm-hmm. Even in the almost 30 years that I've been in the business, it's incredible. And so if you're willing to embrace it, there's always more to learn. There's always more to see. But I also love the fact that it is a relationship business. Relationships matter. Yeah. Commitments matter. Handshake. People care about, others that they know in the business. And, you build a lot of friendships. And I think that part of it is also, there's a lot of industries you can be, industries we're active in as a company where that just doesn't exist. It's much more corporate. There's not as much of the deep relationships that form in this industry. So I think that the combination of the fact that it's an evolving, fascinating industry with a lot of depth to it, understanding what goes on with non-ferrous recycling and how different that is from ferrous recycling, but then understanding how different that is from paper recycling and that white grades is different than OCC, and it's just it's just an industry with a lot of depth to it
and a lot of potential. And I think that's kind of
Absolutely.
what when I think about it, and probably the drum beat I probably beat the hardest and the loudest is, this isn't a dying industry. Like this industry to me reminds me of like a tech industry in the fact that we're just getting started, right? Like we're like just this is like internet 2000, this is we're just scratching the surface on what's about to be possible from a recycling, green technology, all the stuff. I mean, we're anybody that would be interested in like trying to decide, what they want to be in the future, right? Whether you want to be, a scientist or you want to be an equipment operator or there's so
an
many
engineer,
an engineer. There's so
material
many
specialist.
facets to our business that I'm like, if you're looking for like the future of the world that we're living in, it's a consumption-driven world. The two biggest economies in the world. I mean, you're watching China slowly become a consumption-driven economy from very much a manufacturing economy.
And look what's happened to their domestic recycling business just in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and you had mentioned something earlier today. I'll come back to it about China, but my thing is this is a growth-driven industry. I think there was some time period where people just thought it was just kind of a old school kind of a. And I'm like, you guys, if you peek underneath the hood a little bit, you're about to see. And regardless of what administration is in office, I don't like to play the politic game just because I don't enjoy it. I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do to the best I can, with the given the parameters I have to work in. I'm not gonna fuck whoever's the president's the president, and vice versa. Like I'm just gonna do the best I can with what I got.
Absolutely.
So regardless of who's in office, you're seeing the trend. I mean, and not just from the U.S., but I mean globally, people are trying to figure these challenges out, and they're trying to figure them out together in a lot of respects, because our industry is very global. I mean, we're buying, selling, trading, moving. I mean, trash is one of the biggest global trade businesses that the U.S. has, right? From an outbound scrap from an export standpoint, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, we're exporting that, and that kind of sometimes I think catches people off guard.
Yeah.
The volume of material that's
prepared
leaving.
Commodities. We're not exporting trash. We're exporting.
There was a long period of time when we were exporting trash.
True.
And before all the MRFs started coming on board, and that was a big thing that the U.S. was trying to get away from, was being a trash exporter. And I think we've made leaps and bounds, in progress in the last, say, 15 years. How much more what's gonna happen 15 years from now? I think it's gonna blow people's minds, right?
We were talking this morning in the car about electric vehicles and what's impact that's gonna have. The recycling industry is, as old as it is, it goes back to biblical times, right?
Yeah.
As old as it is, it's brand new.
Yeah.
Because it's constantly evolving. Material science changes, how you can recover, classify materials, continuously evolving, the machinery that you can use, people don't think of it this way, but it is a technologically driven business. It truly, truly is. And it will continue to be that way. I think that is only going to become more advanced in the future.
And because people are going to put resources behind it. And I always say, if you want to know where the future is, look where the big resources are going, right? I mean, look where the big boys are stepping and follow their footsteps. and that's where you follow the money essentially. Where they're putting their money, are they putting it into coal-fired plants? Or are they putting it into green technology?
Right.
Well, the only way you get there is through recycling, one facet or another, right? And I
Because
think
how can you have a green technology if you haven't thought about what happens at end of life?
and that's what that whole article was about on the new steel on the steel industry was how can you feel good about building green technology windmills, bases, all the components, plus all these solar panels and all this stuff if it's still being made at a coal-fired or
Still
steel
being
plant,
powered
right?
by
Still
it,
being
yeah.
powered, and then or using versus like say a traditional blast furnace versus I mean it just all those technologies play a role in creating a truly green technology
And look,
industry. And
we keep talking about, there's a lot of talk today in the world about electric vehicles, right? Well, guess what? Every charging station needs copper.
yeah,
The transmission wires to get there need copper.
the average vehicle requires 3 to 4 times the amount of copper that a combustion car requires.
Requires. So copper is infinitely recyclable, has great values, and the scrap industry is the industry that makes that possible, right? Kicking all that copper back into the supply chain at the end of its life. And so this industry is really going to be pivotal to making green technology happen, to realizing the potential of it.
I feel like the people ask me all the time, about our business, our specific business, and how we've been able to grow it. And I said I kind of got lucky. In when I started in '04, it was at a time when recycling was kind of becoming cool as far as it was green, and that '04 to '08, it was green. We were recycling was becoming more pushed to the forefront of how we're going to move everything forward, and there was money to be made, and all the way into like '08, at least on the scrap side, right? Into '08, and the economy tanked, and the price of commodities went down, pretty aggressively. But I was that short little window. I was able to recruit a bunch of smart people into our business, which enabled us to grow our business, right?
Sure.
So then if I take that and project it across the whole industry, it's like how do we grow and how do we build a strong industry or strengthen it and grow it? It's our ability to get young, smart people into the
Absolutely.
industry, right? So
critical.
So I think about it, on my little mini scale of the world over here, and how do I, project that out? Like, what is going to be my contribution to the industry? And it's hopefully getting younger generations to think like this is a industry that's got a lot of potential, right?
Sure.
And how do we get those young minds into our industry, those young equipment operators into our industry, all these people into our industry that can play such a vital role, the engineers, you name it, right? They can just push it along and really explode it.
And that goes back to, why does the industry need to get out of this mindset of flying under the radar,
Yeah.
right?
And you ask me why I do the podcast, because I like what I do, right?
Right.
You guys are doing a podcast too. Like you're trying to expose all the goodness that's going on.
Exactly. Take an industry that has operated in the shadows and is widely misunderstood and add some more visibility to it, add some more transparency to it so that young people start thinking about the fact that there may be a future for me in the recycling industry. That may be a really interesting, opportunity. I shared with you that my son's in the business today, and I think that that's fantastic. But he only had visibility on it because of what I do for a living, right? He wouldn't have known necessarily, and I think that that's just another reason we as an industry have to do a better job of getting out there, tell the story.
Yeah.
Right? It's an old industry that's constantly being reborn.
Yeah.
Constantly being reborn. And we talked a lot today about how your dad did business versus how you did business, do business, and how everything's changed. And yeah, it's still the scrap business, but it's not the same.
No.
And that's the same for every company. And it's true in India, as it's true in the Middle East, as it's true in China, or here in North America or Europe. We have to do a better job as an industry about communicating what we are and what our value is, because that human capital that you need, everyone struggles today with attracting, qualified workers, whether that's a crane operator, a metal sorter, or an engineer to help design a processing system, right? How do we attract those people? We have to create an industry, an awareness of the industry, so that they're interested in it, right? And there's a lot of work to be done in this arena.
So how do you think, I mean, in your opinion, and I asked Jennifer this the other day too, I said, what do you think, how do we do that? How do we, as an industry, generate that, interest, pique the young minds, the up and comers, the real smart people out there that are, going to change this and add value and bring new technology? How do we get them in?
I think there's, obviously I don't have all the answers.
No,
there's a lot of things that we could do. Again, that community engagement, some companies have done that extremely well. More companies need to embrace that. They've got to embrace it. I was also involved, again, through ISRI. We've been very involved, a big supporter of the association, but they collaborated with the Jason Project to create school-age curriculum to teach recycling. And it was built in the framework of science, STEM, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it went all the way to the level of giving teachers lesson plans that they could deploy in their classroom, right? Mm-hmm. It met STEM requirements, but it is built on, and you can go from elementary school all the way through high school, right? Mm-hmm. Not enough companies have taken that to their local school districts where they're active, where they have kids in school, and said, oh, did you know that there's this really cool project that we can deliver to you, curriculum, specific assignments that you can work on with the kids? We need to promote it. And, people say, well, what's ISRI doing to promote that? Well, it really comes down to the companies in the industry to take that to their local, because listen, all life, there's an old saying, all scrap is local, right? Mm-hmm. All politics is local, all scrap is local. It's got to happen at the local level, right? 100%. It has to happen at the local level. I think that program could do a wealth of good. What about stepping out of your comfort zone and getting involved in local community colleges or universities? We're in Boise. You've got Idaho State University right here, right? Yeah. You could go in and speak.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And lift the veil. Lift the veil.
I did a speech at the they do a statewide landfill association meeting, and just the landfills, because they're fighting different battles than we are, right?
Sure.
And just explain the landfills what we're doing, because then they're out there projecting what they're doing for the community and what the value and the service they're providing. I did one for the College of Idaho, which is a college right in our backyard there in Caldwell. I did the same thing, discuss the trash business, the waste business, the scrap business, which are three very different industries. People get them confused, waste, trash, and scrap commodities, right? They try and blend them on occasion, but the reality of it is it's very different.
Totally different.
It's very different, and explain them the difference, But trying to do my part, but there's more I can do, and I think that's one of the reasons why I want to do this podcast. I mean, there's another.
But I think what you do with this podcast is another great thing. We talked earlier about John Sacco and what John's done with Pile of Scrap and,
Yep.
creating awareness, and he's out there and he's talking about the industry and he's sharing, the realities and the value of what the industry is. It's a great thing.
And I think that each area, each state, could have their own representative, even if it's just one per state for a while. Like one company to say, I'm going to take on Oregon, and I'm going to talk about, just what our company's doing in the state of Oregon for in the recycling industry, right? And I think that there's something there that somebody just has to take the ball, because then everybody else starts to get on board, right?
Yeah.
I didn't do my podcast until Sacco convinced me to be on his, right? I didn't really want to be on video. I didn't want to be on, I didn't really like listening to myself talk or on camera or whatever. But eventually I just got over it and said, fuck it, I'm going to do it. And I was happy I did it, because it's enabled me to connect, and it's brought a lot of value to what I'm doing, and I can't thank. And I've thanked him, and I thanked him. I thank him every time I buy a fucking piece of equipment from him. But
don't thank him too much, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, he kind of motivated me to do it, right? And so my only thing is, if a guy like me who didn't even want to sit down can find a way to do it, then I think there's a lot of companies out there that can find somebody to kind of get there and start that process.
Yeah. So you mentioned our new podcast, the Scrap Show, that Brian Taylor's hosting now, and just did an interview with Becky Peroler and Michael Friedman were the first two ones.
Yeah.
But Megan Smalley, who's a younger member of our team, does a podcast called Fresh Perspective.
I've listened to hers because she had my buddy Jake Bronstein on there.
Yeah, so fantastic. So Megan's done an amazing job of helping young people, young folks who have joined the industry, share some of how did they get into it? Why are they in it? What have they learned? What are they doing? What's it about? And hopefully that's also something that other young folks who might be thinking about this industry, they could go in and listen to some of those and say, wow, like these people are doing cool stuff.
Yeah.
So we've supported that because we think it's so important, for the future of the industry. I think a lot of companies need to get more open to supporting, their team getting involved in their community. We've had members of our team, we've guest lectured at community groups, we've guest lectured at universities, we've guest lectured for different schools, and I just think that more in the industry need to think about how they can do that and listen, you could talk about it all day long, but at some point you got to get off the dime and do it.
And I'll tell you what, like, just from a guy who's doing it every day, there's value in it for your business too. And I think hopefully I can get maybe some people motivated to do it if I tell them, like, you can actually see value on the back end of your business. So not only are you getting the front end positive exposure for the industry, but you'll get value from it as being the local, statewide, whatever recycling company that's out there doing the right thing, and so it's economics
so
worth
true.
both ways. And I mean,
so true. I
don't do it just for the hell. I don't do it because I'm bored. I mean, I do it for a reason.
I think you have too much going on to get bored.
Yeah, so I stay busy, right? But I do it because I see benefit on multiple fronts, or else I wouldn't do it. It's just the way it is. And I'm hopefully meetings like this, we can sit down and shoot the shit, and we can convince people, like, hey, do it, like, promote the industry. Like, we're doing a lot of good stuff. Like, promote it, be proud of it.
We've hosted a tour, and I obviously as a media company, our business is a little bit different, but we've hosted and toured high school groups. We recently hired this really great young man who's joined our team as a journalist. We didn't know this till the interview process. He toured through our offices when he was in high school. We're like, wow,
Yeah, that's cool.
And was fascinated by the company, right? So, there's a lot of benefits that accrue to your business if you're willing to be a bit more open and share your story.
Yeah. So
Scrap industry's got to get more open about
we
that.
do, and I agree with that.
It's vital.
If there's a takeaway from this podcast, I mean, and you're the one that opened my eyes to it. Like, I never really thought about why I was doing the podcast. You asked me originally, and I thought because I like the industry, I love what I do, the relationships, and I just love interviewing people that got hustle and that are like builders. They're doers, because I think our industry is built on builders and
Absolutely.
doers and like grinders, and we go through crazy commodity cycles. The big swings, the crazy downs where you're scratching it, and it's not a steady business whatsoever.
Right. And that's another cool element of the business to share is the genuinely entrepreneurial nature of the business.
Yeah.
And you know what? You could be in your case, a third generation company, but still, if you're not entrepreneurially driven, you're going to be in trouble.
Because
right?
of the way that it changes so quick. I mean,
so
we're
dynamic.
not just building fence posts here, right? Like a fence post is a fence post, a fence post. Well, as the years go by and things change in the recycling industry, if you're not willing to adapt and willing to change and willing to grow and willing to take it to the next level, whatever that is, then you're going to get passed too.
Yeah. And one of the things that prompted me to call you was the podcast you and Sean Davidson did.
Yeah.
And, Davis Index. And Sean was largely, you were talking about a lot of the other things with the pricing and how they build their methodologies and all that kind of stuff, a lot of just scrap and history. But you guys also began to hit on this, the scrap industry's got to get out in front of their communities more, right? It was kind of at the end. And it prompted me to pick up the phone and call you and say, man, that point that you made at the end, that is a point that's got to be driven home. And that's where we started talking.
So, last question, and then we'll go eat a bite for lunch. How have you seen, you've been doing this, you've kind of been on the outside, and I call it the peripheral. You get like the best vantage point. You get to see multiple yards in multiple countries and just see things evolve in the industry. What's the biggest, takeaway, the biggest thing you've seen in our industry from 91 when you kind of started with your current, where you're at now, and just what have you seen that's either impressed you the most or that's just kind of been mind-boggling over the last 30 years in the recycling
One
industry?
thing that's amazed me is in my early days in the business, a lot of the machinery and equipment that was used was modified from other industries. It came from some bulk handling market or from coal or from minerals processing, and it was modified to be used in this market. Today, it's staggering the range of technology, of equipment that is purpose-built for scrap processing. If you look at the way automobile shredders and all of the downstream processing has evolved. The SGM Magnetics of the world, or Steinerts and others like them. SGM just built in Long Island, Gershaw Recycling built an amazing Zorba plant, right? That the level of technology is just unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. That's been an amazing evolution and change. The other thing I would say is materials, because the materials have just evolved so much over that period. And another thing I would mention is, and I don't want anyone to take the wrong, but the professionalism of the industry. Listen, it's still, people go to work in jeans and T-shirts, right? I go to work in jeans and T-shirts every day too, and I prefer it that way, right? But even in that environment, the industry's become a lot more professional, a lot more sophisticated, because it has to be. It's, again, people don't. This is a global trading industry. Whether the price of scrap in Detroit or Dusseldorf or Boise, right? It is absolutely dictated by global markets.
Yep.
And that has changed too, because it didn't used to be quite as driven in that way as it is today. So I think, technology, materials, and the global nature of the business.
And I agree with
it's just changed.
both of those points. And I've seen, even on the pricing side, it used to be a set it and forget it at the beginning of the month deal, and then it was you just went about your business, and that whole dynamic, and
So much more
you know,
transparency
it's,
today.
it's became as much of a commodities trading business. So all you Robinhood stock traders out there, like this is another industry that is built for people like on the trading side.
Absolutely.
There's a whole nother component to it.
Sure
Thank
is.
you.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Great
it.
to be here with you today.
Yep. And
Great to be in Boise.
and let the team over there at your guys' side, they're doing the podcast. There's listeners out there. I'm listening to them, and I enjoy them. And keep going, keep pushing.
Great. Thanks, Brett. Great
Thanks,
to be
sir.
here with you.
Appreciate it.